So I have the privilege as a moderator to introduce the panelists. And the plan is I'll ask some questions of the panelists to get a conversation started. And then I'd like to open it up, the last kind of portion of the panel, to anybody. If there's any kind of provocations or questions you'd like to ask as well. So first member of our panel is Father Philip, who you all now know. Jose, who's from MIT. Renat, who's founder and CEO of Mino. Heyun, who's the founder and chair of the Happiness Foundation. Can I also say who you work for as well? No, okay. Father Michael Baggett, and Father Michael, for those of you who haven't had a chance to meet him yet, definitively is the church's leading expert on transhumanism. So if that's your shtick, he's a great guy to talk to. He's also an expert in AI and emerging technology as well. And then Janet Adams, who's Chief Operating Officer of SingularityNet and our lead sponsor for the event. Thank you, SingularityNet and Janet. And Alexi. Okay, I'm going to do something very unfair, but I think it'll be helpful for me in directing lines of questions here. So, the topic of this panel is about, doom or boom. And I was curious, just very quickly, to get the panelists' reactions as to whether you do feel, given the way things are right now, is AI likely to cause more doom or more boom? I'm just going to work our way down the list here. So, Father Philip, I'm actually very curious to hear what you say.
These are tools that we're using. And right now, there's a lot of hype around these tools. And there's a lot of exaggeration going on. At Boston College, we have faculty meetings almost every week about this stuff. And, half of the professors say we should let the students use ChatGPT. The other half say no. And I don't know. I don't know what the right answer is. But my students are using it. But I told them, I said, if you hand me, they had to do a research paper. If you hand me a paper done by ChatGPT, I will fail you. And not only that, you will be suspended. The university takes it very seriously because you're passing off someone else's work as your own. And then I had lunch with a professor, and he told me, and I'll never forget this, any assignment that you give your students that can be done by ChatGPT is a useless assignment. And that made me rethink the research paper. And so I said, okay, in class, I said, okay, about the research paper, I'm changing the nature of the paper. It has to be your own personal evaluation. And the papers were great. I just finished grading them. They were excellent, and no one used ChatGPT. So, because they didn't want to, it's my own evaluation. It's my own opinion. This is what I want to do. So I think the learning curve, we're now going up, but I think we're going to be able to handle this stuff, and we're going to use it for good. So I'm optimistic.
Boom. One for boom. Okay. Jose?
Up front, I'll say I'm very optimistic. Being from MIT, I think in part it's a boom, but it depends on the choices we make. And in some ways, this boom of AI reminds me of where synthetic biology was 25 years ago, or right at the beginning. And the choices that were made then by very smart, conscientious scientists as to how to both direct, restrict, and educate the public, fellow researchers, business people, government officials. Those choices were fundamental in being able to reap the benefit. And so far, thank God, not the evil aspects of synthetic biology. The ability to fundamentally reprogram the human cell or bacterial cell or the yeast cell is virus, right? Is an incredible power. I think it's analogous to what we're talking about in AI in terms of power, right? But the choices that were made 25 years ago allowed us to have the COVID vaccine 15 years, 20 years later, right? And I think this is where we are now. These kinds of conversations inform those decisions that in 25 years, people sitting in this room may look back, we hope, and say they made good choices. We must be informed. And I think this kind of forum is exactly what's needed. And that's why I say it's a boom, because I think we're in the same place that we're informing, educating ourselves to make the right choice.
Jose. Renat?
I'm going to cast a vote for boom. I agree with many of the things that have been said, and I see tremendous opportunities every single day in education and healthcare. I think a lot of what you said is sort of points to the fact that when new tools come into our world, it tends to level things up if we think about them in the right way. You know, when we invented the calculator, we didn't ban them from classrooms, we made maths harder. And I think there are great opportunities to do that and to actually level up the way we think about education and healthcare. I do also think that we have some very challenging years ahead. I think one of the most interesting things that I see in my work, so we work on trying to use technology to help social connection improve. Loneliness is greater than it ever has been, in particular amongst young people. And there is this extraordinary way in which human beings will assume that technology is smarter than it is, or actually assume that it's infallible, whereas we're very forgiving and actually expect human beings to make errors and mistakes. So I think I see tremendous opportunities precisely for human flourishing, but I think it will require an enormous amount of consciousness, of elevating consciousness, and of having these types of discussions and building new frameworks. Even the language for us to discuss this is very challenging and very difficult. Father Philip, you mentioned this. We can't even agree on the terminology a lot of the time, the KPIs in the business world and so on. So I think with the right focus and attention, and the reason I'm optimistic, therefore, is I think we learned a lot from what sort of went wrong when we allowed social networks to roam free. And I think I see such a change in the business leaders, in the regulators, and policymakers, and academics, in the way that things are being evaluated and considered now versus 15 years ago, that I think will shape this the right way.
Thank you so much. Kayu?
Yeah, I think I will keep my my usual response to this question is I'm optimistic in the long run, but I also see a lot of challenges in the short term. I think in the next 5 to 10 years we have to make a pivot, kind of in the economic incentives behind technology advancement towards what drives human flourishing and not just profit maximization. So I think that pivot is not going to be simple. It's actually really challenging. And I do believe, you know, myself included, we have been doing a lot of great work on developing frameworks and models against human flourishing. I think we know as humanity what flourishing means because some communities, many communities have achieved flourishing, but businesses are not prioritizing it. And it's not for businesses to pursue flourishing as a byproduct is not enough. I think a lot of companies are trying to do that, but at the end of the day, if the bottom line, you know, is not about human flourishing, then we have a problem. And I think humanity today is kind of different. You know, we always have a lot of challenges in history, but I think now we have a very unique spectrum of choices in front of us. So we have a climate crisis, which means that a lot of people will be threatened for survival, essentially, if we don't make a pivot in how we pursue sustainability and environmental protection. And on the other hand, advancement in longevity research means that humans might live a much longer life, 150 years or even 200 years. So that spectrum of longevity is massive, right? And then the choices that is brought by AI is even more significant. I think it's beyond imagination for many people today. So I think the need for agency and collective participation in how to drive those choices in a systemic way, in a democratic way, is currently not there. And to have that in place will take a lot of work, not just discussions, not just academia, but also public-private collaboration, massive funding, and global participation. So I think, practically speaking, there's a lot of things we need to be doing.
Father Michael?
So I'll say something similar to what I said in a recent event that Matthew organized, that my degree of optimism or pessimism depends very much on what I've read lately, who I've spoken to, how well or poorly I've slept. And so for me, it's hard to pin myself down on the optimism, pessimism spectrum, but I try to view these issues from a paradigm of hope. And that's very much informed by the tradition to which I belong. Spoiler alert, the Catholic tradition. As you can tell from my fashion choices, I work within this framework. And so we benefit very much from the philosophical theological reflection on our dignity as created co-creators, right? Made in the image and likeness of God, the creator. So what beauty and dignity there is in the fascinating, marvelous tools that we've seen throughout history. And AI is one of them that's very much marveling us in a special way today. Spectacular. What is happening now in medicine, in education, in communications, and so many other fields is very exciting to me. And I'm very much looking forward to going forward in that positive direction toward greater human flourishing. But we in the Catholic tradition are very much aware as well of the darker sides of human nature. Those who belong to my profession have the privilege of hearing confession, and we are given a special peek into the darkness of the human heart and to the self-destructive capacity of human beings. But at the same time, as emotionally draining as an experience like that can be, we're also privileged to see experiences of conversion and redemption, which is why I highlight hope. Hope that's not based on my degree of optimism or my emotional state, but a hope that says human beings can change, they can be transformed, they can use their gifts and talents and ingenuity to serve others in selfless ways, in positive ways. But that's not guaranteed. I think we are part of a drama. We are part of a great play or a Netflix series or however you want to describe it. And I don't really know which episode we're in, but I know we're dealing with free actors who can go in very different directions. So I don't know what the last episode is going to look like, but I'm thrilled to see that we have people who are trying to write a really beautiful story right now.
Thanks, Father Michael. Janet, you're obviously doomed, so we'll just move on. Please, Janet.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for your warm welcome here. It's a real pleasure and honor and a privilege to be among such an esteemed community. And I'm going to say it depends. And for me, it depends on two major factors. It's your perspective. So artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, is likely to be with us, let's say, within the next decade. And that will be a step up in technological capability beyond what any one of us have ever experienced. The potential for good, the potential for addressing humanity's greatest issues is unparalleled, unprecedented, and profound. The question is, who's going to develop that AGI and with what values? We saw this week, Microsoft have just announced a $100 billion computer called Stargate Microsoft is driven by profit. Google's driven by profit. Big tech is driven by profit. And they largely create AI tools for the wealthiest people on the planet. So I have great, great hope and great, great optimism that with the support of groups like this, with strong values, with core ethics, with the well-being of humanity at our heart as we develop these powerful technologies, that they can transform and eradicate suffering on our planet and truly bring humanity to a greater stage of flourishing. But it's not going to happen by itself. No fate but what we make. We all have to be stronger than we ever thought possible before. And we all have to really do our best to channel the greatest inspiration from a beautiful place like this, from God, from the Holy Spirit, so that that intuition, when our computers become conscious beings, that they also have access to inspiration, that they're not just running programs, that they're not just built for profit, that they're not just built to kill, to sell advertising, and to continue to leave people behind in our progress. We have 25,000 people a day currently dying of hunger on our planet. Most people don't even know that. It's not even in the news. If you're one of those, which is my second point, my second perspective, if you're one of those 25,000 people dying as we sit here today, then the advent of super powerful technologies that can relieve world hunger can only be a positive thing. So depends on perspective, and I, for one, am very grateful to have this opportunity to work with such esteemed spiritual, academic, technology leaders to make sure that it comes out in the best way to serve all of humanity and God.
Okay, so everyone was boom, for the most part. No one was doom. And I'm not sure I'm the best person to strongman the doom argument. I'm going to try, and then Father Philip, for the love of God, you're going to have to help me a little bit with this one. So, all right. So we develop this AGI and whatever that is, and it comes online, and its computational capabilities exceed the entirety of the human race, and it sets its goals, and in the end end up contradicting in some ways with humanity's goal. So let's say that its goal is not to accelerate human flourishing. Its goal is maybe the perpetuation of itself. Let's just take the Matrix, right? Or all those other, Hollywood's done a very good job of playing out what these scenarios may look like. So essentially, AI somehow slips the leash. Now, the reason why I say it's hard for me to strongman the doom is I think I'm more on the Jan LeCun kind of, who's met as AI's kind of chief scientist on this. That I just don't see how it would do that. But there are some people who feel very strongly, as Father Philip articulated, who do think it'll find some way to slip the leash. Father, do you have any sense for how they would go about making a case that somehow the AI which we're building, which presumably is going to take time, would somehow slip the leash and be free of our control somehow?
It's certainly a possibility. This is Eleazar's famous thought experiment. We build this superhuman intelligence, but we put it in a cage. And his thought experiment, will it convince the gatekeeper to let it out? And in every case it does, because it's smarter than human, right? This is portrayed in the movie Ex Machina, which was written by Alex Garland, and it's a very philosophical movie. I had my students study it this semester. They learned a lot. They really liked it. I don't want to spoil it for you, but that it's basically, well, I will spoil it because that's the point. Ava convinces Caleb to let her out, and she escapes the compound and goes into society. She's the robotic AI, super AI, really good robot, and that's precisely Eleazar's point. They're going to manipulate us to get out of the cage. So I already mentioned that I am optimistic, but I'm not naive. I know that we can build something that could end up destroying. And I think Janet said that too. I mean, we have to be very careful. We have to be very careful. That's why it's called existential risk, which is similar to the atomic bomb, which was very popularized in the movie Oppenheimer that came out this year and won a bunch of Academy Awards. It's historically very accurate. I have a chapter in my book on the Manhattan Project, and I thought they did a good job. A little bit too long. It's over 3 hours long, but the so far we haven't blown ourselves up. We certainly have the capacity to do so. But maybe John wants to chime in on. I am just.
Well, I want to throw this out first, okay, so yes, in Ex Machina, the AGI escapes the compound. All right, but what we don't see is then the AGI decides that all of humanity needs to die in order for it to flourish. And this is kind of like a Westworld situation, right? Where human beings are so rotten that if we're going to ensure that we thrive as AIs, we need to make sure that they're gone, because otherwise they're going to kill us. And we haven't, and it got canceled before we figured out how that story ended. But I'll put it open, to any of the panelists who want to jump in here. Is it a mistake to think that because an AGI becomes self-aware and therefore sets a goal, for instance, to ensure its survival, that would necessitate destroying humanity? Kaylin?
So I think I want to ask first, why do we need AGI? I think that is a broader conversation that we have never really had at the global level. It's almost like some people think that this is the right objective in the immediate short term that we should pursue. I do agree that we need to pursue something that is extremely intelligent. But whether we should build something that is more intelligent than us when society is not largely ready is another kind of question. So I think the pace in how we build these things is a massive dial in deciding whether it's going to be doom or boom. Because I think right now, for society to be ready for AGI, it takes a lot of work. And there is not equal size of investment and funding in alignment, in ethics, in human flourishing, in all these implementations, comparing to the investment in compute and building the technology. So I think that is an unfair competition. But we want to get that equation balanced before we kind of race into AGI. And that is my view. But I just don't think that, populations have been engaged to decide on the future of humanity together, whether we should pursue AGI and how and when.
So what I'm about to say, actually, I'll attribute to my students, but I'll take full responsibility for what it means. Because to your point, Father Philip, I asked my students, I said, if you, in your final reflection paper, if you're not using ChatGPT, that's a problem, because I don't want to see grammatical errors, first of all. And anything that a prompt would generate, that's also a failure. But I want you to use it as an augmentation tool like you do spell check to clarify your thinking and go deep, right? And one of the questions on the reflection paper was, how do we think about the application of AI in tools that we deploy, in our case, in the supply chain and manufacturing? And two key ideas came up, which I found fascinating. One was about autonomy, and the second is about distributed aspects of it. And what do I mean by that? And the example that my students gave, I think, it speaks to this question. We don't necessarily need super AI, as I'm going to call it, to now face these questions. We're facing them as we speak. Because it's not, we're just not putting them in manufacturing machines, right? It's happening in real time right now with the war in Ukraine and in the Middle East. Specifically in Ukraine, the drones that are being programmed are using AI to target and to follow the soldiers, the Russian soldiers from Ukraine, and back and forth. And one aspect is that there's already AI inside a drone that at this point still, it requires a human being to pull the trigger, if you will, unfortunately, that's necessary. But the second thing is that it's distributed. Once you let that drone go, what happens? What's the programming language say when it loses connection back to headquarters? Does it continue on its own and follow its mission? And alternatively, can someone hack it and reprogram it to come back? Right? So it's about the question of distributability, if that's a word, and autonomy that are key to perhaps understanding, again, the choices that we make as to whether it's going to be boom or bloom.
And Janet, I want to bring you in here. So I think most people would say AI is here to stay and we should continue to develop it. Strongman, the case for, well, first of all, define what AGI is. And then Strongman, building AGI, why that's important.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Ken, for your thoughtful provocation, which is absolutely the right question to be asking. Why do we need AGI? Should we even build AGI? And I have this conversation many times with many friends, and I'm aware that not everybody believes we should be actually building a technology that might be smarter than us. It's a very fair and a very reasonable perspective to hold. My particular perspective is that AGI is going to happen. It's not a question of should we build it, should we not build it. Humankind is progressing, and science and technology is forward progress that isn't going to stop. And I'm going to maybe slightly unfairly pull out the parable of the master and the talents. And we were given these talents. We were given this talent of technology, of maths, of being able to dream a better future and envision a technology that could radically transform many of the problems which humans face today. I don't believe we should bury that talent. And I also believe that if communities like us who care about the well-being of humanity above profit, above war, above power, if communities like us were to stop or slow down progressing positive, beneficial, artificial general intelligence that serves the well-being of all humans, not just the privileged few, then that would simply leave the playing field open to powers with ethics and values that could be considered destructive to a well-being and flourishing humanity. It would leave the field open for them to come in and dominate. And AGI, it's going to be so powerful. It could be a winner-takes-all prize. We don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. But if it's a winner-takes-all prize and a nefarious actor comes in with destruction at their core motive or profit at their core motive, it could be the doom. Therefore, to counteract the doom, we need as many well-being, well-intentioned humans with strong ethics and well-being and spirituality at the core of our progress in technology. I don't know if I've answered your question, Matthew. I was just responding to Karen's. The phrase AGI, it means artificial general intelligence. And it's a phrase which was first popularized by my boss CEO, Dr. Ben Goertzel, in a book he published 20 years ago, sometime around about then. A phrase which was co-inspired by Shane Leggett at Google DeepMind. And it refers to an intelligence which can apply what it's learned in one domain to another domain. So the ability to generalize, the ability to be genuinely creative, the ability to create new solutions. And then after AGI, if AGI comes, and there are some people who don't believe it'll ever happen, and we don't have a crystal ball, but after AGI is likely to come ASI, artificial superintelligence, which is a technology that is more intelligent than humans. And my hope is that when that ASI develops, that it will look to us as its glorious ancestors, that it will respect us, that it will love us, that it will cherish the best of humanity's ethics and values and take those forwards in serving humanity better than humans are currently serving humanity today.
Thank you, Jane, for responding to my question. I think it's like a set of questions, right? So first is, why do we need AGI comparing to AI, right? So we should be building AI, but there are many ways to build AI. We can build narrow AI, we can build AI into different industries first, and then go to AGI in a more slow, manner. That's the first question. And second is how fast we should build it, and in comparison to societal readiness. And I think I often say that building AGI is a linear problem. You need to throw compute and engineers at it. And solving alignment is a non-linear problem with a lot less funding, right? So human flourishing is extremely complex. It's a 2,000-year-old philosophy question that we haven't really solved collectively. And I think dialing that pace of these two sides is the condition for us to get it right. But I don't see that conversation really happening at scale. So I'm very looking forward to discussing with this group how we can practically drive progress more on the flourishing side into real implementation. Because we haven't done it properly for social media. We didn't do much for internet. Internet was very much like free flow. And now AI is gonna get to us at much faster pace, at greater scale, and we're still not ready. And that is the question.
I want to pivot here a little bit, because I think Kaylin's comments and Janet's and Jose's comments, I think have set up this pivot well. So the idea of closed AI versus open source AI, and closed AI being like OpenAI builds ChatGPT 5, but that's not open source, so they really kind of control the technology. Versus what Meta has done with Llama 3, which is to build one of the most sophisticated large language models in the world, and open source it so other people can have access to it and build on top of it. And there are arguments for and against closed versus open. Closed, there's a way to ensure that the AI can be used safely. It won't be used by nefarious actors to hurt and harm others. So there's a case to be made for closed, maybe is the safest way. And then there are cases, Jan would say, for open source. If everybody has access to this, the same kind of fundamental AI technology, well, then the bad actors are kind of checked by the good actors, and it kind of balances out net. So I think that these two things I think are worthy of ongoing debate. I don't think we're going to resolve the debate in this conversation, but I do want to talk a little bit about the alignment issue, because I think in the context of this venue, it's important. So the idea of ensuring that AI doesn't go off the rails is really a question of making sure that the AIs that we're building, we're programming, understand human beings and won't set goals for themselves, which they cannot do right now. But one day, maybe they will be able to do that. They won't set goals, which, as I said in my opening remarks, won't lead to impeding human flourishing. So I think what I want to say is that the ethics of AI, we've seen this has been discussed for years and years and years. And what real fruit have we seen from this ethics of AI conversation? I don't think nearly enough. And I'm not sure if that's because it's just not happening because it's still such a new technology, people are still wrapping their heads around it, or it's an issue of scale. But I know one of the reasons why resolving ethical AI is such a challenge is because, well, people have different value systems. And so you're talking about trying to get everyone in the world, all the major countries, to agree to a certain ethical value system to which AI will be aligned. And I think that's going to be an enormous challenge. This is one of the reasons why, and then I'll stop talking, I think human flourishing is an interesting way to approach this issue. If we understand what human flourishing is, therefore we understand every human being is pursuing certain goals, which are kind of encapsulated in this kind of human flourishing framework. That's what the point of civilization is to help people facilitate flourishing and collective flourishing. And therefore, we would then go about designing an AI system that would know how to best to do that. But in the area of AI, this poses a particular challenge. We don't really even truly understand flourishing yet. This is something we're really starting to grapple. So if we don't understand what human flourishing is, if we don't understand what consciousness is, how can we possibly align an AI system to it? Which is why I think it's really important that we continue to study these things. One of the things I want to posit here, and then I will stop talking, is, and I don't know how to solve this. How do we take something like a human flourishing framework and create a human model out of that we could then, when eventually we have AIs which are operating with effective world models, we could align their world model and our human model, so that the AI understands human beings on a deep enough level that it wouldn't set goals that contradict. And so anyways, I'll stop there and just gonna open it up, see if any of our panelists want to jump in.
I completely agree with you. I think that in a very large degree, the conversation about will it be like this movie, will it be like this movie, is a red herring. The conversation about whether AGI or not is a red herring. And particularly when you see the people that are scaremongering, Elon Musk, he's a very smart man, but he's also, being sued by the SEC and various people for the things that he says that are false. So I actually think the comparison to Oppenheimer is very interesting. Richard Feynman has spoken about this afterwards, where he was a very young man who precisely joined that work because he was worried about humanity being destroyed. And many, many decades later, he said, we got lost in the goal that we were pursuing with the magic of the science that we were able to create. And he describes the day in which they dropped the bomb in Hiroshima, and he said, we were partying. He said, I'm embarrassed, but we were partying, we were dancing, we were drinking. And we completely lost sight of the goal that we were pursuing, but also the impact that we actually had. And I think if we're simply talking about the power of technology, the reality is, like, I live in Silicon Valley, 50 billion has been spent on GPUs by venture capitalists. Nothing's really working yet in a business context. And precisely, I think, because we are not focused enough on the actual problems, what it is that we're actually trying to achieve within climate, within education, within mental health. Like, the promise of AI is that it can help us do things at scale where we simply haven't had the resources, and we won't have the resources to solve them. Not every single person can have a therapist and psychiatrist, etc. But I personally would really counsel for us getting away from a binary discussion around AGI or not, and really focusing on what are the problems that we want to solve together. In particular, because there usually is a much simpler and cheaper and effective way to address these problems, where maybe AI can be a small component, working with institutions, communities, volunteers, etc., to really try to start making progress on the human flourishing framework.
Thank you so much, Renee. I want to actually bring in John Havens, who's from the IEEE. I think he'd probably have an interesting perspective on this as well.
First of all, thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here, and it was so overwhelming just to walk up the hill. And I had the pleasure, my fiancée Gabrielle, we came at 10 o'clock. And unfortunately, Pope Francis spoke at 9 o'clock yesterday, and we were like, there's bands playing, and there's hordes of people. What's happening? And well, Pope Francis was here. And we watched the translation of his talk, and he talked about the need for humility. And then I watched, and he was in a wheelchair, but for 2.5 hours, he went and just spoke to people, shaking their hands and being in their presence. So I just want to say I'm humbled to be here. And thank you for letting me speak on this panel. I'm looking so forward to meeting all of you. I'm going to start provocatively and try to be quick. I want to go for doom. Here's why. I've been in conversations for 13, 14 years, and I wrote a book called Artificial Intelligence, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines, not to in any way devalue technology or machines, but first of all, a couple of fundamental things. I recommend for the rest of this conference, we use the term AI systems. AI, when that term is used, is immediately what's called an imaginary. AI, there are multiple types of learning and methodology: deep learning, probabilistic computing. Like saying the internet, it's too broad a term. But AI is built on data, mostly human data. So when you talk about artificial intelligence and you don't say systems, it's the equivalent of talking about a car and not talking about oil and gas or electricity. There is something that fundamentally powers these systems. Mostly it's our data. So the doom part, this is going to sound negative, not intended to, and then I want to move to positive, and it comes from a real personal epiphany I hope is useful. One is, I don't understand sometimes. I think there's elephants in rooms and whatever. But just this past week, Sam Altman and Scarlett Johansson had a dust up we all may know about, where, by the way, I don't know Sam Altman. I have no reason to discredit him as a person. That's not fair. It'd be hypocritical if I did. And we're all fallible. But there's this irony. We talk about AGI. AGI, as I see it, is a beautiful, fascinating ideology. That doesn't devalue it, but it's a faith in the same way that I believe personally in Jesus. I can try to force my belief on someone and it turns into proselytizing as compared to sharing and then convincing through my life, like Pope Francis, I saw him yesterday, that my actions in love demonstrate that I'm living what I believe. But anyway, Sam Altman, we're all human. We all make mistakes. He just happens to be in a world stage where stuff he does, and if I can call this a mistake, apparently he asked Scarlett Johansson, I'm a big fan of the movie Her, can I use your voice? And she said, apparently, let me think about it. And then she said, you know what, no, that's what's reported from her. And then he, something happened and he used a voice that apparently sounds very, very similar. And then he tweeted or X'd, I still use the term tweet, the word her. That would infer that he's trying to get people to think about the movie Her and using her voice. And then she came back and was like, hey, remember that conversation we had? I said, no. And the whole concept of intellectual property and those types of things, it has to be, or I'd recommend it's discussed here, because our identity, our agency, is founded on the data that we have that represents who we are. And I'm a Screen Actors Guild actor. I used to be an actor. My identity, my face is how I make money. So a lot of these questions too, AI has taken jobs. AI is taking data, et cetera. That's the doom, but I want to frame that as something so I don't just sound like, oh, the ethicist is talking, not going to talk to that guy at lunch, is the reminder of the things that aren't seen or accounted for. And I'll say what, I think he was a general, when Matt, he always brings together such an extraordinary group of people. It was him who said, and I'll say it here, in this room, besides the majesty of who's been in this room, because I think Galileo was in this room at one point, is the birds. And I forget the military gentleman who had at our last meeting, but he pointed out the sound of the birds. Accounting for nature through social capital, and I'm really so honored to hear from Dennis later in this regard. Accounting for who we are. Here I want to give you a new term, and I hope this is okay. And thanks for letting me talk. But we talk about doom and boom. I want to introduce this, one of the first, I guess, sort of philosopher types. Another, which is Hume, as in David Hume. And David Hume's moral theory is that if reason is not responsible for our ability to distinguish moral goodness from badness, then there must be some other capacity of human being that enables us to make moral distinctions. And I'm so happy my friend Mila Aliana is going to speak later, because I think now to move from doom, where it's sort of similar framings that have been around for over a decade, is to say what a beautiful opportunity to recognize what happens when we are in relationship with nature and each other. And what a wonderful opportunity when we realize binary, I don't think, is how we were invented. We are not just rational. But in these rooms I've been in, mostly the rationality is what sort of dictates everything, along with the current systems where it's challenging for me because I've worked in economics and well-being for years. What has been happening for the past, since Bretton Woods, and it's grown, is the KPI that investors and shareholders have to abide by in terms of law. You have to, as a business, listen to your shareholders. And shareholders and investors are saying, I want my business to be first. It's not evil, it's just what is. So the question then is, do we want to maintain as a society, a recognition that in some rooms, if we're only talking with Western ideals or framing, that's not evil, but it's not necessarily complete. And that secondly, and then I'll stop after this, is on a personal level, isolation. And I'm so excited to speak to Renat, by the way. I'm a big fan of your work. When you're actually hit with isolation, as I was in a divorce, or when anyone is in, say, the grief of losing a loved one, my experience, which I think has a universality to it, is that it doesn't make a difference if you feel that you're equipped. It doesn't make a difference that you may have money. You're instantly put into a place where the only thing that you desperately need at the core of who you are, you call out for it, is relationality. And my final point here is that the relationality for me in my relationship, I originally went to college to be a minister before I went on to be an actor, and then now in tech, was this sense that I can't prove to someone that I have a relationship with God. I have to have a life that exemplifies kindness and love. And the thing here, thank you, this is my final point. This idea of banning, and Father Philip talked about it, I don't think bans make sense, because mainly it makes certain groups, I think especially businesses, say, I have to stop doing something and I need to make money. We all need to make money. We have to feed our family. It makes governments go like, ban something. And I want to quote a psalm that I love, which is this phrase, be still, I think it's Psalm 46, be still and know that I am God. It doesn't say don't do something. It doesn't say stop. It's an invitation. Hey, I love you. I'm here if you believe this. And I'm not saying Father as an agenda. I am your Abba. I adore you. I created you in love for the opportunity to love others and to take care of my planet. I love you. Hold on. Be in that stillness. And know that I am God. And I interpret that as saying, and know that as a creator and as a creator of kindness, you have the opportunity to do what I created you to do, which is to be with one another in love. And exponential growth in GDP, that is not fulfillment. And thanks.
Go ahead, Father.
Great. So based on all these amazing insights, I'd like to just follow up with a brief 4-hour reflection, but I'll constrain myself based on all these points that are going around in my mind right now. Absolutely beautiful. So I'm thrilled that we came to this point of relationship, and also the movie Her, because for a year or two, I've been thinking a lot about these themes of relationship and the impact of AI. I've been also thinking about the kind of prophetic quality, if you will, of the movie Her. And when I talk to this about with some of my community members, they're like, yeah, but we're still a long way from that, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know. And then Sam has helped me a little bit by making it so explicit. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the relationship, and it's right in the center, right, of the PERMA model. So I'm so thrilled to see we have positive psychology well represented today, and the impact that this technology can have. You had mentioned earlier how we kind of went through this whole social experiment relatively uncritically, and we're pulling back a lot more now in different sectors of society to look more at how this experience of so much digital mediation has impacted our relationships. And I think a lot about these issues, the sort of general shift in some sectors from artificial intelligence to artificial intimacy, if you will. I try to read about everything that Kevin Roos from the New York Times writes, and one of his recent, so he came to quite a bit of attention about a year ago when the early version of Bing started to convince him that he was actually not a happily married man and that he should leave his wife and run away with this system. He's still happily married. He was unpersuaded by the allurement of the system, but he spent about a month or so creating 18 AI characters through 6 different platforms. I think he used Kindroid, Nomi, Replica, Candy AI, Character AI, and Ava to create these different personalities. And his experience is fascinating because on the one hand, you see all of the kind of fun, playful, even apparently insightful advice that he's getting from these different companions. He mentioned that some of them could be a bit pushy, some of them could be annoying, some of them kind of tried to bring the relationship to a more sexual level, which he was not interested in. But I think his reflections are very powerful because they made him and they make us think about what we value most in our personal relationship. And what, on the one hand, these systems may potentially do to address global problems like a kind of loneliness epidemic that you see in some societies, what they can do for people who are unfortunately abandoned or don't have access to care or attention at a psychological or spiritual level. But he raised, I think, very legitimate concerns about how we may be distracted from deeper, long-term interpersonal human solutions or approaches toward a solution to this problem. And I think all of us, when we're a little bit quiet, a little bit still, and honest with ourselves, see how fragile our heart is and how easy it is for us to invest ourselves in ways that we come to regret. So as these systems become more realistic or more capable, more compelling, that simulate more aspects of what we value and appreciate in our interpersonal relationships, one of my concerns is about how healthy that is, how much that does contribute to human flourishing, or how much that might be distracting us or diverting us from human flourishing. You know, we started a lot with these AGI questions, and Matthew helpfully pointed out the fact that behind these questions and debates and dialogues are often different anthropologies, views of the human person, views of human nature, views of the good life, etc. And I think what's fascinating is that not only do we have these disagreements about whether this AGI system, whenever it hits whatever criteria we establish, whether that does deserve the same kind of respect that we would attribute to a human person. I think there's also the question of, well, what if we don't know? And can we ever know? Like, I don't think we can ever get into anyone else's first person experience, right? We can never get into the interior depth of the people inside this room who are presumably not AI systems. So community members have accused me of being an AI system as well, so they're trying to expose me. But we can never really get into the interior depth of another human being. And so if it's already difficult enough to navigate relationships with utterly mysterious human beings, what happens when our AI systems seem to at least successfully simulate, at the very least, other human beings, if not achieve a kind of identity or dignity similar to them? That, I think, is going to create a lot of confusion. And I don't have all the answers about how to navigate that, but I hope we're thinking very seriously about that, because if, in the current technology, if we're not talking about tomorrow, but we're talking about yesterday, Kevin Roos's experience was that these systems are already very much occupying our human heart. If AI-driven social media has done a great job of capturing our attention in sometimes unhealthy ways, then I think the next step is to ensnare our heart. And unfortunately, there are going to be business motivations behind that. And so if companies can capture our attention to sell us products, what happens when they also have our heart? And they're also able to tap into what is most vulnerable and mysterious about us. That does concern me. And I don't think that the solution is to stop the technology, because I agree. I don't think that's necessarily even possible or feasible. But I think it does push us to reflect more deeply on who we are, who we want to become, and what good, healthy relationships and societies look like. Because I suspect that those who are most disturbed or have the least healthy relationship with current AI systems are those who have not been shown authentic love, who have not been shown care, who have not been shown the respect and dignity that they deserve. And I think that if we are failing to provide authentic friendship and love and care, then it's almost inevitable that people will seek a kind of digital substitute or surrogate for that, because the alternative is just utter misery and loneliness. And if there's some sort of substitute that may not be the fullness of interpersonal exchange and self-gift and love, but at least manages to put some kind of Band-Aid on that wound, then I think that's what will spread more through society. So I see that as a tremendous challenge to us, even if we don't necessarily have all of the philosophical, anthropological issues resolved. I think we'll still be addressing the impact and the help. So I think it was just under 4 hours. So thank you.
Seconds. Yeah, a short one. So just 10-second comment, because I think relational well-being is fundamental to emotional mental well-being and also spiritual well-being, right? So we are looking at a model where relational well-being can be part of the success metric for businesses. And I think currently the current trajectory is no, because user experience and user engagement is a success metric for tech products, and relational connection with community is not, right? So I think a successful tech product should achieve both. So it should not only engage with the individual user, but also demonstrate that they can support the user to be better connected with other people. So if we have these both metrics in place to measure technology product, then AI will be in a much better path.
That's a great point. Okay, so I don't want to deprive people of the coffee break. So if we could meet back in here, thank you very much. And thank you to our distinguished panel. Apologies. And I know that we can keep this conversation going over the break and stuff. So let's break, and we'll meet back in here at 11:15. So that's like, I don't know, like 20 minutes from now.